Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Living with Catastrophic Wildfire panel of the Together Bay Area Fall Forum. I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest speakers today. These are leaders working across the state to protect communities, steward lands, and advance policies that will help us adapt to evolving wildfire regimes under climate change. Catastrophic wildfire is here. Today, millions of acres are burning across California, and all Western states are struggling to protect people and fight fires. Together Bay Area is working with our members for resilient lands, people, and communities. In today's panel, we'll hear from the experts about what we can do about catastrophic wildfire statewide so that we can adapt to living with it every year and keep our communities safe. We'll talk about the diversity of wildfire issues land managers and decision makers are dealing with. Ignitions, wildfire behavior, and the solutions to manage it are not the same across the Golden State. We'll hear about proven strategies to work this problem and learn about the changes we need to make to more strategically steward the lands and protect our communities. Our presenters are California Assemblymember Eloise Gómez Reyes of District 47, Mark Brown, the Executive Officer of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, Margo Robbins, a Yurok tribal member and President of the Cultural Fire Management Council, and Mike O'Connell, CEO of Irvine Ranch Conservancy. Together Bay Area is working with scientists and data analysts across the region to understand the impacts of the 2020 wildfires here. Check out www.togetherbayarea.org for additional information, including an interactive map of fire perimeters and a workbook of 2020 fires through the lens of our Conservation Lands Network. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to introduce you today to Margo Robbins. Margo is the co-founder and executive director of the Cultural Fire Management Council and a Yurok tribal member. And she's here to talk with us today about wildfire management and cultural practices of the Yurok tribe. Welcome, Margo. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
The honor is ours. So, Margo, I'm hoping you can share with our members and partners and Fall Forum attendees a little bit about the cultural practice of wildfire management for the Yurok tribe and the history and importance of fire for your people.
So our people, up until the last 100 years, did not have a history of wildfire practices because we didn't have these crazy out of control wildfires then. Traditionally, Native people burned on a regular basis, and so the whole landscape was treated with fire to keep the land in balance.
Yeah.
And the land that we consider now wildlands was all inhabited and used by Native people, and they took care of all of that land with fire. And it was like similar to a park. What the settlers that came to our land didn't realize is that what they came to, this park-like land, was made that way by human interaction.
Yeah.
So we didn't burn the whole place at once. The land was a mosaic of fire-treated land. So we did burn from the coastline up to the mountains to keep the land healthy and productive, to keep the food sources readily available, to keep the prairies open from encroachment of conifers, to keep the streams clear and strong flowing. The Native people, of course, relied on the land for sustenance, for physical and spiritual health. Fire was given to us as one of the tools to maintain the land, to maintain balance of the physical and spiritual health of the land, the people, and the things that live and grow on the land. Some of the benefits of fire is that it improves animal habitat. Animals are, of course, one of our food sources. deer, salmon, birds, but they need to have specific habitats as native plants do. They need specific things in order to be healthy. They need to have healthy soil, sunlight, water. All of those things were maintained with fire. So when you burn on a continuous cycle of burning, all of those things stay in their proper place. So if you're burning prairies annually, then it kills those small little fir trees that are starting to encroach. Our prairies used to be in our homelands about 50% of the landscape, and now they're only 3% of what they once were because of fire exclusion and because of the timber industry planting trees everywhere. So there is a balance of where things should be growing, and fire helps to keep that balance.
Margo, I'm wondering if you can share with our listeners and viewers, can you describe the ancestral territory of the Yurok tribe? This is a Northern California-based tribe, but you're talking a lot about the land and the makeup of the land and how fire has helped the tribe historically manage this land. Where are these lands?
So we are very Northern California, right close to the Oregon border, and we are on the lower portion of the Klamath River, from the mouth of the river where it enters the Pacific Ocean, about 40 miles upriver, near the confluence of the Klamath and Trinity rivers. Our reservation is a mile on each side of the river, but our ancestral territory is much larger.
Much more vast.
So, yeah. The river flows through the middle of our reservation. There are very high mountains, very steep country, very beautiful. But right now it's like really, really, really overgrown with brush. The brush is so thick you can hardly see through it. And so that's one of the reasons why we started the Cultural Fire Management Council, is because all of that brush is a fire hazard. We're worried that people might not be able to escape if there's a wildfire. But the other reason is that we need fire to continue our cultural traditions. Yurok people, especially Yurok women, are basket weavers, and the hazel needs to be burned in order to be useful for basket weaving. Hazel forms the frame of our baskets, and it will not produce new shoots unless it's burned. So those are the two primary reasons that we started the Cultural Fire Management Council. And as we started to burn, we came to realize that it is restoring the land to an overall state of health.
Yeah, restoring the land and restoring cultural practices and history. I heard in what you shared, Margo, that fire was given to the Yurok people. Would you mind sharing a little bit of that cultural story with us here today?
Yeah. So along Pecan, a long, long time ago, before humans inhabited this earth, there was a race of spirit beings, which we call Wage, and it was their job to make this place ready for humans to come. And so they made the earth as we know it. The plants, the trees, the rocks, the animals, all of those things were once spirit beings that came here, but they were in spirit form.
Okay.
Some of them took on physical form later and stayed. But when they was in spirit form, the earth was dark and they had no way to cook their food. And so they decided that they needed to do something about that. And so what happened is they ended up going up into the sky and stealing fire from the ones up there that had it, and light. And they passed fire from one animal to the next because they were being chased by the people who owned fire. But it was passed from one animal to the next until finally it was given to Frog, who put it in his mouth and went under the water. And the ones that were chasing him finally got tired and went back to where they had come from. And Frog came up out of the water and spit it in to the base of the willow. And that's why traditionally we use willow sticks to make fire.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story, that creation story of fire and how it's connected to your people. I'm hearing you spoke at a kind of high level about how the council works with fire, sort of the priorities around working with fire. And within that, I heard you talk about the importance of maintaining cultural practices, a connection to your origin story and the history and current culture of the Yurok people. But I'm also hearing you talk about managing the landscape for food production, to preserve habitat for wildlife, and to keep communities safe. These are a lot of really critical priorities that are connected to your practice, Margo. Can you share a little bit about the work that your organization is currently doing to use fire to preserve and enhance the environment in your ancestral home?
Yes, so we do cultural burns on a sort of a landscape level. We'll burn the whole mountainside or a drainage. Twice a year, we have what's called treks, and it is a training for qualified firefighters, and they come and help us burn our land. They increase their firefighter qualifications, and they learn about how to do prescribed burns. The other thing that they learn is that when they come to our territory to help us burn, they learn about our culture and why fire is important to us. So before we start to burn any hillside, we go out and we walk the area and we show them the culturally important species that we're burning for. You know, the hazel, the medicine plants like wormwood, the mushrooms that will grow back, the medicinal teas, the acorns from under the tan oak trees. And so they realize that how important this job is that they've come to do. And it means a lot. And we also share some of our cultural life ways with them. We'll go to a traditional, dance house and talk about the ceremony that goes on there. And so that they have insight into why these things are important. Our traditional ceremonies rely on things from the land to help us lift up prayer. A girl's ceremonial dress is made of buckskin, deer. And it's decorated with bear grass that needs to be burned in order to be useful. And so we lift up prayer with baskets. That's, like I said earlier, some of those plants need to be burned in order to reproduce and be useful. So that's one of the kinds of burns that we do. And it is conducted as a training. And the other kind of burns that we do are family-led burns. So family-led burns take place when CAL FIRE has taken off the burn restrictions. And when we get good weather, we can help families burn around their homes or gathering places. So we have tools that we can loan out so that they can put a fire line around the area that they intend on burning. And then on the day that they want to burn, they let us know, and we bring our little slip-on fire engine so that we have a source of water on site should it be needed. It's an extra measure of safety. And so it is reclaiming a traditional way of burning, because long ago it was families that took care of the different areas with fire. So they would, burn their own gathering places, their own hunting grounds.
So I'm hearing in what you're sharing that in order to keep these cultural practices going today, that the work has to come both from within the tribe, but also in partnership with entities outside of the tribe and your council. So for example, you mentioned working with CAL FIRE and others. And I'm wondering, Margo, if we can think, kind of move this story out of the beautiful Yurok territory and think about the state of California for a moment. Because the work that you're doing is in partnership with some of these state entities and other partners today. And I would love to hear from your perspective. Well, we've seen a huge shift. This is the most obvious statement ever. Huge shift post-settler colonialism in what California tribes are able to do to manage their own territories. And you mentioned a history of fire suppression and prevention that gets in the way of these cultural practices that for so long have maintained the land. Margo, I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit what you see when you read the news and you see that over 3 million acres have now burned from the August lightning complex fires across the state. And we see historic levels of catastrophic wildfire happening, harming nature, harming communities, impacting lives and property. What do you see as a person who represents a culture that has been working with fire for so long and understands deeply and intrinsically the value of fire in managing lands? What do you see as needed today at the state level to begin to address the wildfire crisis that we're in?
Collaborative partnerships are essential to addressing these wildfires that continue to get bigger and hotter and last longer and longer, that we all need to work together. The government agencies, tribes, nonprofit organizations, private landowners, that we need to work together because the job is way too big for any one entity to address in an effective manner.
Mm-hmm.
The CAL FIRE is actually on the verge of implementing a burn boss program for private landowners, which is huge.
Huge, yeah.
It's huge. And there is Senate Bill 1260 that's been introduced and on its way, and it covers the need to up the scale of prescribed burns. So legislation is needed.
Mm-hmm.
We also need to all work together to change the narrative about fire, because for more than 100 years, that's at least 4 generations, it has been ingrained in people that fire is bad.
Right.
And these uncontrollable wildfires, it's true, they are bad, but they could be prevented with prescribed fire.
Right.
And prescribed fire is a way to impact in a big way how big these fires are getting and how far they spread. But like I said, it's not any one entity that can do it. CAL FIRE can't do it alone. The Interior Department can't do it alone. We all need to work together. We need to put fire back into the hands of the people. Everybody should have the right to burn. We need to teach people how to do it safely and allow that to happen. It's critical, because when we have not only fire government organizations working on a landscape level to clear the forest floor of all all this woody debris and brush that fuels the forest fires. And then we add to that the nonprofit organizations that, such as ours and the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council and the Prescribed Burn Associations. And we add to that tribes. I mean, it's going to make an impact.
Right.
It is going to make an impact, and it is going to change the course of this global warming fiasco we're headed towards, which the wildfires are really contributing to. Not only are they putting up a bunch of toxic smoke and up into the air, it's also burning up the forest that would normally take the carbon out of the air. So it's like, wow.
Yeah. I really appreciate what you're sharing here, Margo, because you're describing multiple levers that we as a state, as humans on this planet, can potentially pull on to start to shift this dynamic. I heard you talk about public education, about the role and nature of fire. I heard you talk about legislation and collaboration and partnership across jurisdictions. And when you share these ideas, it gives me a lot of hope about what is possible. And I couldn't agree with you more that if we were all able to come together in this way, it could be truly transformational. There is a project, I'm sure you're familiar, in the Six Rivers National Forest. It's a partnership project between the Karuk tribe and the US National Forest, USDA, excuse me. An integrated wildfire management project that seems really innovative and sort of describes some of this partnership level approach that you're talking about. What are some of the connections that your council has made to, you talked about CAL FIRE, but what are some of the connections that you've made to other entities to begin to put more fire onto the landscape?
The Karuk tribe is our neighbors, and so we work with them, and the nonprofit organization that they work with, the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council. We also, of course, work closely with the Yurok tribe and CAL FIRE and the air quality organization, North Coast Air Quality. And one of our biggest and most important partners also is the Nature Conservancy. They have made possible for us what we've been able to do up to this point. So we have been collaborating with, those are our primary organizations that we've been collaborating with. There are, of course, others. And you know, when you mentioned the collaboration that's taken place up in Karuk territory, it reminds me of when we have all those different organizations that come for the training exchange, and I tell them the story about how we got fire and how all those animals cooperated together to bring it.
Yes.
And I said, you know, it took a lot of different kinds of those animals to bring fire back for the people. And that's what we're doing here now. You look around, we have all these different people from all these different agencies, and we are reclaiming fire for the people.
I love this, and I'm so inspired by your organization's intentional focus on bringing all of these animals, if you will, together in the ecosystem to do this work. It's a real pathway, I think, for land managers, tribes, and nonprofits across the state to look at and adopt as a model, Margo. One last question, if I may, for you. I heard in your description of your partnership with the TREX program that there is a real intentional focus on the cultural meaning behind fire. So you talked about the food sources that are promoted through the use of fire, some of the cultural artifacts that are created through the use of fire, how it supports basket weaving. This practice of prescribed fire, when we think of it in the sort of conservation world, is a land management technique. But for the Yurok people, it's so much more than that. It's actually a tool that promotes cultural resilience. And I'm hoping that you can share just a little bit with us, a little bit more specificity around that, the cultural meaning of wildfire. You've talked about sort of the practical aspects of it, but culturally as a people, this isn't just about getting fire on the landscape, but it's about maintaining and strengthening your cultural practices, your history as a people. Can you share a little bit more about that with us?
Right. So as I said earlier, in those pre-human times, when the Wage spirit beings were here, some of them stayed and they took physical form, and they are the trees and the plants and all of those things. And so they're the descendants of that pre-human race of spirit beings, and they still have a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we have a spirit, and our spirit is directly connected to the spirits of the things that live and grow on the land. Fire is also a spirit. It connects us to the spirits of the land, and it works with us to keep physical and spiritual balance. As Yurok people and tribes in many, many places, we send our prayers up with smoke.
Yeah.
We have we call it engine root that we burn. And when the smoke comes up, we send our prayers up. And those prayers are answered with fire, not wildfire, but good fire. Well, one of the things that I would like to mention is the connection between fire and water. They seem like they would be like direct opposites, but fire has a connection with water. When we burn, it leaves charcoal on the ground. Some people call it biochar. But if you stop and think about what water purifiers have in them,
yeah,
it's charcoal.
It's charcoal.
It's charcoal. Yeah. So
Yep.
when we are burning watersheds, we are purifying the water. And also when we are burning all that brush off the land and it's no longer there to suck up all the water, it increases the water table. And so it is helpful for the salmon.
Yeah. Helpful for salmon and helpful for the water that your community needs, water supply and quality.
And for those plants that rely on damp, moist places to be healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
other thing about biochar is that it makes the soil healthy.
Add nutrients. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it also sequesters carbon in the soil.
Yes, and as we know, soil is such an important component of carbon sequestration. So we want to promote that. We want to promote that efficacy. Yeah. Right.
So those are some of the additional benefits of cultural burns or prescribed fire. I believe the only difference between cultural burns and prescribed fire is that cultural burns are done by with Native people with an understanding of the spiritual elements of it, and prescribed burns are more something that anybody or everybody can do.
Right, right. Well, I know our Together Bay Area members are really interested in supporting the leadership of California tribes, including the Yurok people, in using wildfire to protect communities, to preserve our environment, and to celebrate the cultural practices of our Indigenous tribes. Thank you, Margo, for sharing so much of that with us.
Right. I kind of hate to say this, but it's not using wildfire, it's using controlled fire.
Controlled fire, you're right. Yes. That's right.
We don't want it to get wild.
Yeah. Prescribed fire.
Right. A prescribed fire.
Yep. Thank you, Margo. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce everybody today Mark Brown. He's the executive officer of the brand new Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. Mark, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, glad to have you. So, Mark, you've spent many years fighting fires, helping to prevent fires, and now you're taking over this new organization, Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. And I understand that this authority has been created because the community decided to tax itself with Measure C to help create this organization to keep communities safe, prepare for wildfire, sustain our natural resources, and work together on this huge problem that we're all facing across the state. Can you tell us a little bit more about the authority and its work?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only did it passed with a 70.8%,
Right.
and it was just about the only tax measure that passed. And so I feel that that's a tremendous message right there. And we had so many stakeholders that were interested in this, and they all agreed, first of all, fire knows no jurisdictional boundaries, and it's time to stop acting like fire understands that. And we all felt that we needed a holistic approach that took all the agencies, whether they're fire agencies, law, land management agencies, local, state, federal government. And then most importantly, our communities need to be part of that. And the main goal for the MWPA is to bring all of those together in one body that can coordinate across all the different agencies for a common goal.
Yeah, and I see that the authority has multiple sort of priorities that it's undertaking. So there's sustainable vegetation management that's conducted in coordination with jurisdictional agencies and stakeholders. You've got grant making programs that you're going to stand up, defensible space evaluations for community members. Clearly, this is a problem with vast complexity, and the authority is wanting to stand up this organization in order to try to address all of the various nuances of these problems. Can you talk a little bit, Mark, about the large catastrophic wildfires that we're seeing here today, but also maybe just the condition of living with wildfire in this state and what that means for communities, what's needed to address this at such a complex and huge scale?
So let me touch on the living with fire before we talk about the large catastrophic fires.
Sure.
I would imagine the people watching this little chat here know very well that fire's ecology is dependent upon fire. And we've removed fire in two different ways. The Native Americans did a much better job at managing the forest with fire than we do. And we've voluntarily taken that out of our bag of tricks. And way out in the wildland areas of the national forests and national parks, you're seeing a lot more vegetation management burns, but you're not seeing it in and around communities. Mm-hmm. And so we are creating unhealthy and decadent forests right up against our homes. And then we also have our 110 years of a total fire suppression policy that we go out and we extinguish all fire. Yeah. And there's often a goal that if it's a naturally occurring fire, such as lightning, that we would let it burn. But we've pushed people so far into the wildland now, there's very few places that we can actually let fire burn and not threaten people's lives. So if in those areas where we can't do prescribed fires, then we are going to have to do mechanical removal of the vegetation, whether it's cut and scatter, cut and chip, or cut, pile, and burn. We need to do a little bit of that. And then we need to be a little bit more aggressive in our vegetation management prescription burns. Even if they are within a couple miles of communities, there are ways and times to do those safely. And then we create such a healthier forest. And, one of the things that people don't like about this prescription burning is smoke. And in reality, smoke is it's a pay me now or pay me later proposition. We can either create the smoke under our terms, or we can have the smoke get created on not our terms and put thousands of times more smoke in the air, which we've all been living for 2 months now we've been living with that.
That's right.
And so that kind of brings us to the mega fires, and everyone wants to talk about so much about the mega fires. But in reality, that's 1% of the fires that we see. And I really believe that we need to focus on the 99% of the fires. We need to focus on the 3 to 5 acre fire that will impact homes or impact lives before a fire engine can get there. And so we need to do vegetation management practices that keeps that fire low intensity, and do work around homes and make homes hardened so that the homes can defend themselves without a fire engine ever being there. And then what the great part about that strategy though, is that if everyone concentrates on the 99% fire, when that 1% fire comes, we are that much safer because our community preparedness is the sum of its parts. And if everyone's done their part, we're that much stronger.
I really appreciate that sort of a strategic approach that you're talking about. We heard from Mike O'Connell at the Irvine Ranch Conservancy that the state has taken a very strategic approach to protecting communities from earthquake impacts and the dangers of earthquakes. And that we need that same level of strategic planning that starts at communities and expands out to the wildland urban interface and then further into our forests and wildlands. And that obviously sounds like a lot of work and overwhelming, but what you're describing is a really strategic focus on each of these sum of the parts, as you say. Mark, can you talk a little bit about what the authority will be doing, working with multiple stakeholders across jurisdictions? What are some of the examples of how we begin to take these strategic steps?
Absolutely. So the ordinance has 3 categories of where we'll be spending money. 60% of it will be in vegetation management projects that include evacuation route clearing, and public education, and then also evacuation notification processes. And that's where we can really get strategic, is that we're going to start focusing closer into the front yards and backyards of homes. And that's where our life threat is. We're going to focus on our evacuation routes to make sure they're clear. And then we can start focusing on the vegetation further and further away from the homes. And public education, there's so much information that's out there now, but we as the fire service haven't really given the public the proper education or experience to actually digest the information that's coming to them. And so we feel if we can increase that public education, it's going to make people more motivated to be a part of the solution before the problem ever occurs. And then they also will be able to react accordingly when the problem does occur. Yeah. And then the notification system, so we can get people out. And then what's a really important partnership in that vegetation management practices is that we've aligned with numerous environmental stakeholders within Marin County. And because we understand that our vegetation management work may actually make the environment worse. And so we are partnering with the environmental stakeholders from the very beginning of our planning process all the way to the end. Then we have 20% of the monies will go towards defensible space evaluations, where we're encouraging our citizens to do their work around their home and also make their homes hardened, and so that they're more likely to sustain an ember shower, because that's normally what's taking houses out, right? And then the final 20% is going back to the 17-member agencies that we have, because they really are the subject matter experts for their communities. And they have some projects in mind that they want to use, but they don't have the money to do it. So this is going to give them their money that they can actually focus in on some local projects.
Incredible. I mean, you're leveraging relationships, funding, working with communities. There's a lot going on under the authority's role to help keep people in Marin safe and educated about wildfire. I heard in what you were sharing, Mark, that public education component is really big in order to keep people safe, and also working together on this problem. Can you talk a little bit about if there was, in all of your years fighting fires and helping to prevent fires from happening, what is the one misconception you would like to undo, or the one really important point you would want all Californians to understand about wildfire in this state?
Wow, I can go on for a long time.
Go for it.
To me, we in the fire service, we call it situational awareness.
Okay.
And our citizenry needs to be really in tune with the environment and know what days are a high fire threat day and what day is not a high fire threat day. And on the high fire threat days, use the ready, set, go principle. You're ready on a high fire danger day to evacuate. And then when the evacuation warning occurs, you're set, your bags are packed, you're ready to go. And then when the evacuation order occurs, you go. So I think the biggest one I want people to understand is the situational awareness. But again, we've done a little bit of scaring the public with all these mega fires, and every fire that ignites, we're actually putting a tremendous stress load on our communities when they think that every fire is going to be the next catastrophic mega fire. And we have people stressed out 20 miles away from the fire. And right now, the fire service is not in a sustainable pace in being able to control these fires. And if people stress about every fire that occurs, then our citizens aren't going to be on a sustainable pace either.
That's such a good point. I think it's really what I'm hearing and what you're sharing is that there needs to be a greater understanding about the different characteristics of fire, not just in your location, but statewide. And that all of us at the stakeholder level and at the land managing agency level have a role to play in helping people understand wildfire and how we live with it.
And the understanding that if used properly and ignited at the right time, fire is actually very healthy to the environment.
Yeah, I think moving away from what I grew up with, right, Smokey the Bear, that wildfire is always a bad thing, is a nuance that I'm really hoping will catch on with the public. Can you talk a little bit, Mark, about how and when and why we would want to manage a natural ignition, for example, a lightning strike? What does that mean to manage a wildfire?
And again, it has to be done under the right environment and in the right locations. And rarely, at least in the Bay Area, do we have that. But you get into some of our national parks that are or U.S. Forest Service lands that are hundreds of thousands of acres. And if the lightning strike occurs when we have moderate weather, and there's terrain features that can help guide the fire one way or another, or not let it go a way we don't want it to go. And then just allow that fire to burn out the understory and take all the litter that's on the floor of the forest and let it slowly burn away. It puts nutrients back into the soil. And then it also takes out some of the unhealthy trees or bushes that are up and standing, clears them out and allows the stronger plants to continue to grow. But during the summer, rarely do we get into a weather pattern where lightning comes and then we can allow a fire to burn. And so that's why we need to start being strategic about us applying fire to the landscape instead of allowing Mother Nature to wait for lightning.
That's right. Yeah. And then this is also similarly making the case for doing ecological stewardship of lands for fire resilience and actively managing fuels and vegetation for those reasons.
You gave me an opportunity to talk about some of the projects. I would like to talk about some of the projects real quick that we've engaged in.
Sure.
We have been very successful with chipper days, where just about every community that's paying this tax has had a chipper truck show up. And the way I look at it is that one visit of that chipper truck that shows up at your house and you're able to throw debris into it, that's actually the amount of money that you would pay for that chipper is more than what you've been paying tax. So that's a return on investment. We've already had 3 public education sessions through Fire Safe Marin, and then alert notifications. We've been so reliant upon technology in our cell phones, right? And then when the power goes out, cell sites go out. And our NOAA weather radio system is still alive and well. And so we're starting a pilot project that you can use a $25 radio that doesn't fail if you have power for it, and it has battery backup. So we have just one more way to be able to notify people. And then I really want to echo or reinforce the environmental compliance. We know how important environmental compliance is. And the fire service at times has a track record of trying to shortcut environmental compliance and go around it. We're not doing that. We're embracing that and embracing it with our environmental partners. And then taking the resident first attitude.
Yeah.
And we have some awesome evacuation maps that we're pushing out that actually have been scientifically studied as far as the psychology of people when they're under stress, and making a map and their features more understandable when people are stressed.
Incredible, Mark. These projects you're describing answer such a diversity of need, both the human sort of emotional and planning and safety needs, but also being able to actively work on the landscape at that scale to prevent our natural environment and provide all the multiple benefits that we know our watersheds provide: clean drinking water, a place to recreate, wildlife habitat, all of those good things. I really see the authorities' work as a model for the state to be replicated at the regional level. Thank you so much for your time, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Mike O'Connell to our panel today. Mike O'Connell is the president and CEO of the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Mike.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So we've talked a lot over the years, Mike, about the regional diversity as it relates to wildfire, and that California doesn't have one singular wildfire problem. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of information with our viewers about that.
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, California's fire issue is really divided into two separate regions, which largely coincide with Northern California and Southern California, with some exceptions. And those two fire regimes that exist in those two regions lead to two different kinds of problems that we need to address. Unfortunately, as a state, we focused almost entirely on one of those problems, the problem of forest fires. Whereas in Southern California, where I live and work, we don't have major forests. We have shrublands, and that's a completely different fire regime. In what it comes down to with these two kinds of fires is that we have fuel-driven fires, fires that are largely driven by the fuel that they consume, and we have wind-driven fires. Those are fires that are almost independent of fuel loads and are driven by very strong winds. In Southern California, we call them Santa Ana winds. And that leads to two different issues that we need to address. The challenge with fuel-driven fires is that we've had too little fire on the landscape historically. Everyone knows that. It's become common knowledge that the lack of fire, particularly over the last 100 years, has led to a fuel buildup that's made our fires in forests much worse than they need to be, much more catastrophic. They're primarily the result of fuel loads, and the solutions to that are primarily vegetation management solutions. So when you hear the fire agencies talk about fuel modification or fuel reduction, that's what they're talking about. And the catastrophic fires are increasing in those systems. But there's a very different challenge that we have in Southern California. And I would note for you that, at least half the state's population lives in this area. So this is not an isolated issue.
That's right. In
shrublands like we have in Southern California, wind-driven fires are the big problem. And actually, counterintuitively, our problem is we've had too much fire, almost 90% too much fire. These shrublands are adapted to have return intervals for fire on the order of maybe 50, 70, sometimes over 100 years. But we're getting fires every 7 to 10 years, which means it's about 90% off. And that leads to a spiraling problem. They're driven primarily by wind events. And the solutions are not really directly involved with vegetation management, although there are some strategic things. They're primarily about preventing ignitions and protecting structures and homes from fires. And our ignitions are increasing. In the Southern California landscape, like I said, we have had too much fire, and 98% of those are human caused. They're either accidental or intentional ignitions. In Northern California this year, we've had some tragic lightning caused fires, but we don't have very many lightning caused fires in Southern California. At least in Orange County, our mountains aren't high enough to get the kind of dry lightning or even lightning storms that we've seen this year. Also, 93% of those fires occur along primary roadways or power lines. And that's from data from the Orange County Fire Authority. 93% of all of our fires are starting along primary roadways or power lines. They're catastrophically wind-driven. And here's a really, really important statistic, Shelana. 90% of our acres burn in only 10% of our fires. Wow. Only 10% cause 90% of the damage. So if we're focusing on all fires, we're missing the ones. It's very much like an earthquake, right? So there's a scale of earthquake severity, and the most of the damage is done by earthquakes that are 6.0 or above. But we're not focusing on those in Southern California as much, and we should be. They're nearly independent of the fuel loads. In other words, they will start and they will be carried in annual grasses as much as they will in older shrubs. And they start at a confluence of high ignition and high spread areas. There's a picture that I'm showing you right now, which is the mean fire frequency departure in the Cleveland National Forest in Southern California. This is San Diego, Riverside, and Orange County. And you can see from the color of the map that most of these areas are dramatically shorter fire return intervals than they've been in the past. That just means we're getting too much fire on the landscape. So what do you do about that, right? How do you reduce risk, and where's the leverage in getting that risk? And it turns out there are some things that you can do. You can harden primary roadways and hotspots where ignitions occur. We've got data mapped for where these ignitions occur, and it turns out that they occur in places that could be defined as hotspots where multiple ignitions will occur over the years. And you can make it harder for the fires to get out of there and prevent the fires from starting there in the first place. Ignition prevention, primarily during wind events, is really what we're talking about. You know, we've had a couple of dozen fire ignitions in Orange County this year, and none of them have made the news because they've occurred outside of the time when winds are occurring. And so we're not getting these fires getting whipped up into catastrophic events, and they've all been stopped at 2 or 3 acres. We're actually very well resourced in the fire service for these non-wind events. Surveillance and arson prevention is something that can be done in Orange County. We have what's called the Fire Watch program, and there are over 350 trained volunteers that look out for fires. They use the remote camera network, the fire surveillance camera network, as like virtual fire towers, and they're even stationed out on the land to prevent arson. There are obviously some power grid solutions that are very, very important. And I know that in Southern California, at least, Southern California Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric are working really hard to upgrade and get very focused on ignitions that are started by the power grid. Also creating wildfire resistant communities. It turns out that in our region, as many as 80% of all homes that are subject to potential ember cast from fires do not meet fire code. And that means that they're just sitting there waiting to catch on fire the next time an ember falls on them. And one of the things we found, that the last thing with regard to risk reduction that has been really, really effective is regional collaboration. It turns out that this problem of wildfire risk reduction, particularly in wind-driven fire systems like we have in Southern California, it's far too complicated and involves too many different variables for it to be a problem that the fire department can take care of alone. And so putting together a regional collaboration, in Orange County, we have over 24 agencies and organizations and local governments and fire departments that are working together constantly on all of these things that I've been identifying in risk reduction. So the bottom line is reducing wildfire risk in California means solving both fuel-driven and wind-driven fire problems. We've focused a lot on the fuel-driven fire problems of forests, but I believe we need to start also focusing on some of the unique issues reducing risk in wind-driven fire systems as well.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask you some questions, but we may end up repeating a little bit of what you shared in your presentation. I hope that's okay.
That's just fine.
Okay. So Mike, there's a lot that you just shared in your presentation. Thank you for that. And I'm hearing that one of the things that's really pressurizing things in Southern California in terms of wildfire and community safety is the fact that there is this increasingly short fire return. And you shared that this isn't necessarily because of fuel overloading or a lack of forest management. That's not the ecological system that we're dealing with in Southern California. And I find that a really interesting and important distinction to make. So based on all of that, though, can you share a little bit, why are wildfires, how are wildfires changing over time in Southern Climate, and what are the drivers of that change?
There are a number of things, and one of the clear changes is climate change, which is causing the season when these fuels are cured and dried and ready to burn to be longer. We don't necessarily know it for sure, but it's very possible that these Santa Ana wind events that drive these fires are going to get more frequent due to climate change. And I think the most important thing, Shelana, to keep in mind is that in a forest system, the primary driver of the fire is fuel. Yeah. And in shrubland systems, the primary driver is the wind. Yeah. And so everything then flows from there, right? So one of the key strategies here is ignition prevention, preventing fires. Well, a lot of people will say, well, you can't prevent every ignition. Well, of course you can't, but we actually don't have to prevent every ignition. We only have to prevent the 10% of the ignitions that cause the catastrophic fires. And guess when those occur? They occur in the 18 to 20 days a year when the winds are blowing 80 miles an hour. So there's actually a tremendous amount of leverage there because those wind events are predictable. We get 72 hours notice usually before a Santa Ana wind event occurs. And so if we focus our fire prevention activities around those wind events, that's a big, big step.
There's a lot of hope in what you just shared, because one of the things we talk about a lot in Northern California here is that our fire season is disappearing and it's just becoming an elongating fire season, if you will. But it sounds like in Southern California, given that these changes are in fact driven by increasing and more powerful wind events, that there is some predictability with timing around that. And as you said, this is a lever that land managers in Southern California can really work to try to reduce catastrophic wildfire.
That's right. One of the things that's been a theme throughout my career in conservation has been looking for leverage. Where do you get leverage? And in this situation, there are really three things I think that provide leverage in reducing risk over doing something like trying to clear fuels at a landscape level. In fact, I'll talk about that for a second, which is the approach in a fuel-driven system where we're reducing fuel loads. That is really important because you're reducing the intensity of the fire. But in a fire that can be carried in, two-year-old annual grasses, that's not as much of an issue. So we need to focus on three things. We need to focus on ignition prevention, but the timing of that ignition prevention is really, really important. We actually need to also focus on hardening structures. It turns out that the wind events mean that the fire front is not just where the fire is burning. These embers can blow, and we've seen this all over the state. Once the winds start whipping up around the fires, and the fires can generate their own weather and generate their own winds, you can see embers going sometimes 3 to 5 miles or even more downwind. In fact, one of the saddest things I ever saw was watching a fire. I was watching the news last year, and there was a fire on the east side of the 5 freeway in the Santa Clarita Valley. And it was actually lighting homes on fire on the west side of the 5 freeway. And it was exclusively due to winds. And what that says is things like fire breaks don't really work in a wind-driven system like that. They may help in managing a fire or providing access to a fire. So it's not an either-or situation. But when you have the 5 freeway serving as a fire break and it doesn't work. That pretty much tells you what you need to know. But what we can do is we can harden homes. Just like we've made so much progress in California retrofitting structures for earthquake protection. Yes. I think if we approach the same philosophy with fire, and we looked at all of the structures that were at risk and actually focused on helping people prepare their homes and harden them for a wildfire, it would make an enormous difference. There are so many pictures in the aftermath of fires where the entire neighborhood is burned down, but there's actually all the vegetation is standing. That means the homes were
Right,
vulnerable.
the vulnerable ones, right.
And then the third thing is actually strategic fuel modification. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that we're either against or ignoring the idea of fuel modification. It is really important. But in Southern California, it's more about providing defensible space than it is about trying to reduce fuels. You stop the fire by creating defensible space around communities that are at risk. So this idea of 100 feet of defensible space, or in some cases even more, that's really critical. And if you go around our region and you survey, there are an awful lot of designated fuel modification zones that are not being managed well, that are full of fuels, and that is also a problem. So again, ignition prevention, structure hardening, strategic fuel modification, those are the things that we need to be working on.
You've provided an incredible depth into some of the strategies that I think can help us avoid future wildfire disasters for communities in particular in Southern California. And I'm hearing that there's a different approach. There's a landscape-driven approach, but you also touched on regional collaboration, Mike. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit with us about how, for example, the Irvine Ranch Conservancy works with its neighbors, works with the state, perhaps works with the federal government to kind of move away from this suppression-based approach on managing fire to looking at the three strategies that you're talking about in concert with other land managers that are nearby or care about the work that the Irvine Ranch Conservancy is doing.
I'm so glad you asked that, because that's actually how we wrap all of this together. Okay. And as I mentioned before, the challenge of the type of fire regime that we have means that it's not something that you can just turn to the fire department and say, right, hey, fix this problem. The fact is 82% of all our ignitions occur along primary roadways. Well, the responsible entity for that is Caltrans. If they're not at the table, then we've got it. You know, there's a limited amount that the county fire authority can do when the roadways are being maintained by Caltrans.
Right.
And likewise, another 11% of the ignitions are occurring along the power line and utility corridors, and that's also something that you have to engage others in. And so, with that idea in mind, actually, in 2015. The Orange County Fire Authority chief convened a group that's called the County of Orange Area Safety Task Force, because everything has to have an acronym, right? So it's called COAST, and it's 27 agencies, landowners, nonprofits, fire departments, municipal governments, Southern Cal Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, Caltrans is at the table. Basically, everyone who is affected by the fire issue is sitting down and working these problems out and identifying those strategies. And in fact, the three things that I mentioned before, the three strategies, I didn't invent those. They came out of that group based on the science and the research and the understanding of the fire regimes. And so we have everyone at the table, and that's a much better way to address a problem that, as a good friend of mine who works for the National Park Service said, the challenge with this wildfire issue in Southern California is it's everyone's problem and it's no one's problem.
No one's problem at the same time, yeah.
And that's really what we're faced with. The Irvine Ranch Conservancy's role in that is that we actually facilitate that working group. And we've done so for the past 6 years. And it's just in a neutral facilitator role to bring everyone together and communicate and develop agendas. And it's really been a very powerful tool. And I think given the complexity and the size of the wildfire problem, not only in our region in Southern California, but statewide, that's the only way that we're really going to get on top of this. It's all hands on deck right now.
I couldn't agree more. All hands on deck, and really having the state and the federal government support a regional approach. That's where right. We know the land managing agencies, nonprofits, and neighbors know what's best and what's needed to protect their communities and their environment.
We all share a piece of the problem, and we all share a piece of the solution.
I agree. I want to ask you a question about prescribed fire. And I know that with a chaparral landscape or an annual grass landscape, prescribed fire may look a little bit differently than we consider when we think about it in a forested landscape. But I'm curious what you think about prescribed fire as a management technique for wildfire in Southern California. And I'd also love to hear your thoughts about the interplay between air quality management and the use of prescribed fire as a tool in protecting communities.
So that's a great question. And prescribed fire, frankly, has very limited use. I think it's a tool that everybody jumps on because it sounds very powerful. And in some cases it is.
Right.
Again, when there hasn't been enough fire on the landscape historically, prescribed fire may be exactly what's needed. The challenge is when we are dealing with systems that have, to give you an example, in Orange County, 60,000 acres have burned in the last 10 years in Orange County, which does not sound like a lot, but we're not a very big county. It's actually a very large part of our county. Many of those acres have actually burned multiple times during that period.
Wow.
So what role would prescribed fire have? You also brought up air quality, which is a huge issue as well. I mean, we just spent the last 2 to 3 weeks under a haze like everyone else has from high level atmospheric smoke. And that's a big problem. And if we're using prescribed fire to try to solve the scale of the problem that we've got, there will be an air quality impact as well. And I can't talk about air quality without also talking about the climate effect, frankly, of all of the burning. One of the things I saw a statistic the other day that almost just froze my brain, which was that in California we have invested, many millions of dollars in, if not billions of dollars, in greenhouse gas reduction, and been largely successful in different sectors.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that the number of acres burned in California in each year emits more than 10 times the amount of greenhouse gases than all of the reduction programs that we've done for the state. So we could spend billions of dollars reducing greenhouse gases in sectors and have all of that washed out by a bad wildfire season in 1 year. In fact, I think it's something like if 100,000 acres in California burns in 1 year, it negates the entire greenhouse gas program of the state. And how many of them have this? We've had 3.4 million as of today.
Yes, as of today, we are. Yes, it's a record-breaking amount of acreage that's burned, and it is such a distressing thought, right? To think about all the progress we've made under AB 32 goals, to have that all wiped out by a series of catastrophic fires, or even 1 or 2 really bad fire years. It is even more motivation for us to, as you said, get all hands on deck, working on this in a nuanced, regional way. Yeah. So, Mike, we talked a lot about different strategies that work in Southern California and some strategies that are not a perfect fit in Southern California. As a land manager, what is the systemic shift, the paradigm shift that you would like to see happening in Sacramento and DC that would support you in your region in protecting communities and preserving biodiversity in Southern California?
I think there needs to be a complete shift in the understanding of what is actually going on here. I think that when we've dealt with wildfire, we've had a traditional view of what wildfire meant. It was about forests. It was about forest management. You hear that even in the last month in the discussions around the fires that are going on in Southern California, all been a forest management discussion. And I think the systemic change that needs to happen is people need to understand what's actually driving wildfires and what's driving wildfire risk here. It's almost more of an education issue than anything else. So we're kind of entrenched in this view of what wildfire is. And the 3 solutions that I mentioned before it's not rocket science. It's not that difficult. I mean, they're complex and they are probably expensive, but we're spending billions of dollars on alternatives that are not doing anything.
Right.
And so I think that there needs to be a shift in mindset about what the problem we're trying to address is. And once that occurs, then we can all get together on a solution.
That's great. And I'm building on that, Mike. I'm wondering if you can share some of the bright spots that keep you going through a terrible fire season like that and working towards the solutions. You mentioned your organization convenes regional stakeholders around wildfire management. Can you share with us what gives you hope in that work?
Sure. Yeah. In fact, it's starting to be what we call white knuckle time down here because the wind season hasn't really gotten into full swing. And in fact, some of the predictions are that October is going to have a number of Santa Ana events. What gives me hope is a couple of things. One is that we have been able to get everybody to the table, and I can't take credit for that. I've just had a small part in it. It was the leadership of the Orange County Fire Chief, as well as the leaders in these organizations. Everybody realized that working together was the only way to do it, and they have come together. So that gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope is the nature of the problem we're trying to deal with. We've actually done things like this before, right? So we have an earthquake problem in California, and will always have an earthquake problem, but we've done a huge amount to reduce the risk from earthquakes. And the difference here is you can actually predict a wildfire. You can see it coming, or you can prevent a wildfire. I don't think we've figured out how to prevent an earthquake yet. We've done it as a society with hurricanes. I'm a native Californian, but I actually grew up in Florida and went through my share of hurricanes. And Hurricane Andrew was a turning point in Florida where the state decided that it actually had to change how it prepared for, responded, and managed hurricanes. And they've made a huge, huge difference since then. And I think the fact that we've been able to tackle things like this in the past gives me hope that we can do it again. And the fact that you can't prevent a hurricane, but you can prevent a wildfire.
Yeah.
You can't prevent an earthquake, but you can prevent a wildfire. And then if you look at risk from the leveraged points that we've been talking about, I think that gives me a lot of hope that we can do it. It's just getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike, because you've just given me hope in pointing out something that, maybe is intuitive, but I think needs to be said in that sort of educational effort that you described, which is that we can stop this climate threat from happening. And there are actions that we can take at the regional scale with support from the state that will actually protect communities and our natural environment.
Can't wait to be a part of it.
Likewise. Thank you, Mike.
You bet.
Well, it's my pleasure, everyone, to welcome Assemblymember Eloise Reyes here today. Assemblymember Reyes, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon. I don't know what time we'll be watching this.
Thanks so much for being here. Assemblymember Reyes, you've served on the Conference Committee for Wildfire Prevention and Preparedness. Your district has been bracketed today by the Bobcat and El Dorado fires. You understand deeply, both for your district and from the statewide perspective, what is needed today to be able to live with and be safe from catastrophic wildfire, as you've called it, the new normal. Can you tell us what is driving these fires? How did we get to this place?
Well, first, I want to thank you, Shelana, and I also want to thank Annie for inviting me to join you today at this Together Bay Area Forum. I think it's clear that our wildfire season, it's no longer a couple of months. It's now year long, and we've seen the devastation, the trauma, and these fires are nonstop. I think when we think of what's causing this, there are so many factors, but the one that we know we have to deal with is climate change.
Yeah.
We can't deny that this is a big part of what's happening. Yes, our utilities have been responsible for some of these fires, some of these catastrophic fires, but climate change and everything that comes with it, we have to address that. I think if we're committed to finding solutions to, as you said, this new norm, this new normal, then we have to commit to joining the conversation. And once we've talked, we have to commit to take action. I think it's one of the biggest problems is that we do talk, but when it comes to the action, everybody just kind of takes a back seat. I appreciate so much that the two of you and so many other leaders are here to put a plan together, not just to talk, but to plan on what needs to be done. As a state assembly member, I do want to share with you my commitment to working with the community to help address these devastating wildfires.
Thank you, Assemblymember. We're so grateful for your leadership on this important issue and so many other issues that you tackle both on behalf of your district and for all Californians. Really important. I want to talk a little bit about some of the complexity of this issue that I think poses a challenge both for elected leaders, but also stakeholders, land managers, in terms of addressing this problem at its root. This past weekend, most of Northern California was once again under a red flag warning, and many of us are anxiously checking fire maps and evacuation orders. Tens of thousands of Californians are without power. We know today that more than 3.7 million acres have burned this year. This is an historic figure. And we also know that California is a naturally fire-prone state with a diversity of ignition sources and a diversity of landscapes, including forests, annual grasses, and chaparral that need to be managed in order to keep communities safe. Assemblymember Reyes, can you tell us a little bit how you and your colleagues in the legislature and working with the administration are beginning to tackle these complexities? What do you focus on first?
I think what's important is having the stakeholders together.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we think of stakeholders as the big interests. For me, the stakeholders include the very people who are suffering through these wildfires. Yeah. They're the ones who can't get the insurance now. They're the ones who are losing their homes. They're the ones who are having to evacuate. They're the ones who are losing so much. It's clear that every year our wildfire season is becoming more and more devastating. You talked about some of the statistics.
Yeah.
One of the ones that comes to mind is that 5 of the top 20 largest wildfires in California history happened right now in 2020.
Right.
I remember not too long ago when we were reading that we were now at 2 million acres, and that was the most in any year. We're over 3 million acres now burned. We have 25 major wildfires, and as we talked about earlier, Santa Rosa is now having to evacuate. The devastation is real, especially for those who are losing their homes, losing their businesses. Here in San Bernardino, we almost have the El Dorado fire contained. It's at 92%. And I sincerely appreciate the work of all of our firefighters. It makes a big difference when you have these committed men and women they're risking their life. In fact, we lost one of our firefighters just last week, and we were devastated by that.
Sorry to hear that.
Yes, and we have firefighters coming in from other countries. We just had 100 firefighters from Mexico that just came up to assist. I just saw yesterday that they're on their way home now that the fire is 92% contained.
It's great news about the containment of the El Dorado fire, and we love to see the response from so many different parts of the state, other states, and as you say, from other countries as well, rallying to support California in fighting these fires. And in fact, the firefighters, the men and women who are out there every day doing backburns, creating fuel breaks, and protecting lives and property are such a critical component of our state response to this huge issue. And I know that this is in particular a set of people who you are really interested in protecting and promoting the good work that they do. Can you tell us a little bit about recent legislation, AB 2147, that you helped author?
Thank you so much. I was very proud. It's been 3 years. We've introduced a similar bill 3 times. And this time, the language was perfect, and we were able to work with the stakeholders to get this passed, and it was signed by the governor 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I've met with so many formerly incarcerated firefighters. They've developed the skill set, and they have put their life on the line to fight right alongside our firefighters and done so much in this regard. But up until now, they were automatically excluded from ever being hired because they needed an EMT license. And that license comes from the state of California. And with a felony conviction, you weren't available for that. These inmates are frontline workers. They're serving their time, and they're also protecting our community. To mitigate this issue, that's because that's the reason that I introduced AB 2147. And this bill will now provide an expedited expungement process for inmates who have successfully participated in the inmate hand crews, especially in the fire suppression activities. It passed in the Assembly, passed with bipartisan support, also passed the Senate, and as I mentioned, it was signed by the governor. I think this is extremely important that now all of these men and women who have received all this training can now be on their way to completing that profession as a firefighter. They volunteer for the job. Nobody forces them into it. They volunteer and they know the risk they're taking. And so I sincerely appreciate all the work they've done. This is true commitment. They want to turn their life around, and I think that finding a path for them to go into this career, I think is one of the things that I'm most proud of in this last session.
Yeah, absolutely. This is such an incredible story of restorative justice and marrying principles of equity along with resource management and community protection that we need to see relative to wildfires. So we're so grateful to you and your team for leading this work, Assemblymember. I want to ask you a little bit, we've heard from some of our panelists about public education and engagement that's needed as critical work to help address this issue at scale and to help keep communities safe. If there's one misconception about wildfire that can be undone, or one idea that you would like the public to understand about catastrophic wildfire and some of the paradigm shifts or systemic changes that we need to make today, what would that be?
I think it goes back to climate change. We have to accept that climate change is playing a big role in this. There's so much, during our hearings, we learned of so much that could be done, and a lot of this is being done. I think of AB 38 by my colleague, Assemblymember Wood, in response to wildfire dangers. He's done so much. It'll now require that homes be retrofitted as determined by the state fire marshal. This will help us reduce fire danger. I also think of AB 1054 by my colleague, Assemblymember Holden, who is the chair of the Utilities and Energy, which created a wildfire relief fund to pay victims of utilities caused wildfires. And there's just so much more that needs to be done. But I think that the one thing that all of us, whether we're in the middle of a wildfire area or not, is that we have to recognize the role that climate change is playing in this. And we have to be willing to dedicate the resources that are needed to protect those who are living in the middle of these areas.
That's right. Thank you, Assemblymember. I'm really hearing what you're saying, that there's a need to connect the dots for communities about what's happening, the smoke in the air, the fire danger, with the human-driven changes that are impacting our climate. Really important.
I'm glad you talked about the air. That's something that here in my area, the environmental impact in our communities is extremely, it just affects so many of us. Environmental justice is a key component for me in my area. It seems that the communities who can least afford to inhale this smoke and everything that comes with it are the ones that are most impacted. And we have to do more to make sure that we protect those communities.
Yeah, that's such a critical point, because the public health impacts of these wildfires, on top of a respiratory pandemic that we're facing, is really, it's devastating, and of course has a disproportionate impact on particular community members. And those needs need to be lifted up and addressed first. Really appreciate that, Assemblymember. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.